Across the cold Atlantic, Viking longships cut through the waves, their dragon-headed fronts rising from theft. After weeks at sea, they reached a new land, huge forests, powerful rivers, and good soil that seemed perfect for a new beginning. They built houses, unloaded their farm animals, and believed they had found a place to call home. But land was not empty. From theforists, native warriors watched it closely, experts of the bow, fast in their canoes, and determined to protect their land. At first, there was trade, careful and tense, until one spark was seen to turn peace into open war. Arrows darkened the sky, shields locked together, and the first battles on American soil had begun. Imagine Greenland, not the lush Greenland its name might suggest, but a harsh, unforgiving land. Here, the Tinuston settlement, home to maybe 400 tough farmers and their families, lived a life always balancing on siege. One bad harvest, one unusual cold winter, and they were staring down the possibility of starvation. Wood especially was a precious thing, a lifeline. Without it, how do you build? How do you repair? How do you survive the freezing cold? It was in this place that Eric the Red, the adventurous Leif, the hot-headed Thorvald, and the tough, sharp-tongued Freydis grew up. They spent their childhoods huddled by smoky fires, listening carefully as weathered sailors returning from dangerous voyages would talk and rave about a mysterious, seemingly endless forested coastline far to the west. It was a land of myth and rumor, a place where wood wasn't just scarce, it was everywhere, stretching as far as the eye could see. Wood meant wealth. Wood, more importantly, meant survival for their struggling colony. So in the year 1000 AD, driven by a mixture of curiosity, need, and perhaps a touch of that famous Norse love of adventure, Leif Erikson bought a sturdy Nair, a type of Norse merchant ship, from a fellow trader. Hetton recruited 35 restless Greenlanders, men and women hungry for opportunity, for a new life, or simply for adventure. They packed their few belongings, their tools, and their hopes, and set sail. Riding the powerful West Greenland current, they pushed southwest day after day, week after week. The biting, salty smell of sea ice slowly gave way to something warmer, richer, the unmistakable scent of pine. It was a smell of promise, a smell of land. Finally, after what must have felt like forever on the open, often dangerous ocean, they found it, a wide, sheltered bay. It was a place of famous beauty and here they built simple sod-walled booths, temporary shelters to Gento, the earth, and with a sense of victory, Leif named it Vinland. Thesigus described a land so rich that grapes grew wild and salmon filled in rivers. It was a paradise, seeming. Importantly, as Leif's crew explored, they found no natives in sight. Yet, the sagas tell a remarkably true story of Leif's crew wintering there, loading their ship with the plentiful grapes and valuable butternuts, and then, without a single scratch, returning home to Greenland. It was, from their view, a successful, peaceful scouting mission. They had found the wood, the grapes, the trouble, the real trouble, the kind that changes the course of, only began when bigger, greedier expeditions, drawn by tales of Vinland's riches, decided to follow Leif's well-mapped route. This is where Thorfinn Karlseflein's our story. Not just a sailor, but an Icelandic merchant, a man of great wealth with deeper pockets than Leif, and importantly, a pregnant wife named Gud. Karlsefni wasn't interested in a quick scouting mission. He was looking to establish a permanent settlement, a new home. In 1006 he gathered an ambitious 3 ships loaded not just with men, but with livestock, cows, pigs, and even one famous liber-tempered bull, and about 160 settlers, men, women, and children, all packed onto those long ships, hoping for a fresh start. They retraced Leif's path, following the familiar coastly Untold. They reached that promised land. There they built a more solid palisaded village, a small fort that modern archaeologists and historians now call Hop. Almost immediately after their arrival, the Norse met that these were likely indigenous peoples such as the Beothuk or Micmac, ancient inhabitants of this land for thousands of years. The Norse, with their typical bluntness and self-centered view, quickly called them the term often translated as street-skinned people or even wretcheswise, an insult suggesting scrawny weakness, a lack of civilization. It was a dehumanizing label that immediately set a tone of cultural superiority and possible conflict. The Skrallings, for their part, stared at the Norse iron with a mixture of wonder and confusion. They had never seen metal that didn't bend. that held such a shock. Their tools were of stone, bone, and wood, useful for their needs, but greatly different from the hard, harsh iron used by these newcomers. A careful, curious trade began. It was a dance of hand signals, a cautious exchange of goods, a handful of bright red cloth, a color likely amazingly new to the indigenous people, might be traded for a stack of valuable fox furs. A cup of fresh creamy milk from the Norse cows, and completely alien drink, could be exchanged for a stack of smooth wool. Both sides, very aware of their newness and possible danger of thamiting, kept their weapons visible, but carefully lowered. It was a fragilipis, a thin layer of diplomacy over a bubbling cultural gap. A Viking axeman, perhaps puffed up with boldness, or simply unaware of the power balance at play, bragged that the Skrelling skated like chickens when he merely waved his gleaming steel axe. They likely saw a deeply troubling, aggressive display. Meanwhile, the native archers, quiet and observant, tested the range of their bows. They'd shoot arrows into driftwoods, letting them thump harmlessly into the wood just a few steps from their Norse camp. Was it a show off skill, a warning, a quiet statement of their own power? It was trade, yes, a fascinating, never-before-seen exchange of cultures and goods. But the balance of power and possible conflict was already balanced on a hair trigger, waiting for the slightest push to fall into chaos. And what was that trigger? The sagas, those ancient Norse stories, lay Theblum directly on a bull, not a Viking warrior, not a native chief, but a single bad-tempered, confused bull. One spring morning, this huge, powerful beast, one of the precious few brought across the ocean, somehow escaped its pen. Terrified and confused in this strange new land, it thundered through Anaby Skrelling camp, a whirlwind of miskel and fear. In its panicked rampage, it stabbed a dog, perhaps a beloved hunting companion, leaving it dying or dead. For the locals, this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, brutal attack, a violation of their space and their peace. It was an act of aggression that could not, would not, gun punished. Days later, the 30 skin canoes, sleek and silent, came around the headland at sunrise, cutting through the morning mist like angry spirits. The air was suddenly thick with arrows, their flint and bone tips thumping against Norse shields painted with the ravens and crosses of their distant homeland. The Vikings, experienced warriors, quickly formed a tight shield wall, a defensive tactic effected on the battlefields of Europe. They managed to beat back this first attack, capturing 3 canoes in Theb. It was a victory, but a Costa Leone, a clear signal that the careful peace was shattered. Just a week after that first clash, 9 Skrelling scouts, silent as shadows, crept near Thrul of Hop under the cover of night. They were likely observing, planning, checking the Norse defenses, but they were spotted. Thorvald Eriksson, Leif's brother, a man whose sagas paint them as war-hungry and quick to action, saw his chance. He led a swift, brutal raid on the sleeping men who lay helpless under their upturned canoes. 8 throats were cut by the unforgiving edge of his seeks, a short, heavy Viking sword before a single, perfectly aimed arrow, tipped with punched under his armpit and stuck deep in his chest. It was a fatal blow, a precise act of revenge. The Vikings, shocked from the sudden loss of their leader, retreated, carrying the Indian chieftain back to their camp. According to the touching accounting, the saga of the Greenlanders, Thorvald, as his life drained away, gasped out his final prophetic words. "This is Eric country, but I will not be the only to enjoy it. I've found my death's resting place. Bury me here with Crassus at head and feet." The first European toady by native weapons on American soil, bleeding out on an unknown shore, a Skedfer Christian markers, a harsh, almost ironic request on a continent whose people had never seen, let alone the symbols of a distant foreign religion. The fuse definitely was lit. The conflict had grown from skirmishes to a full-blown bloody war. Summer, which should have brought restand growth, instead brought full-scale, never-ending war. The Norse still clung barely to their beach camp at Hop. But every dawn their guards scanned the dense tree line with annoying fear, searching for any flicker of movement, any sign of the certain attack. Skrelling were parties, now emboldened and oft tendous and strong, became a constant, terrifying presence. They staged endless hit-and-run ambushes, emerging from the hiding depths of the forest and sweeping in from the sea in their swift canoes. Their tactics were clever, effective, and deeply frustrating for the Norse. They favored 2 main approaches, First, a distant, terrifying rain of arrows, designed not always to kill, but to force the Vikings to huddle defensively under their upturned shields, disrupting any organized movement. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they would vanish, melting back into the thick spruce forest. A landscape the Norse, with their heavy armor and straight fighting style, feared to enter. It was a mental warfare as much as a physical one. The Vikings, for their part, answered with the only tactics they knew, the ones that had brought them victory across Europe. Tight, organized shield walls, their axes shook threateningly over the rims, ready to strike. They would launch sudden, aggressive rushes designed to cut through bone and break enemy lines. But in this new world, against fierce new enemies, these tried and true thoughts felt less effective. The saga's record on a particularly scary stand-up fight took place south of Hap. In this battle, the native warriors parade a large dark blue ball on a pole. It was a strange, unsettling sight. When he spun it, this mysterious object roared a deep guttural sound, described as being like a tortured dragon. Modern historians guess it might have been a large inflated animal bladder, perhaps filled with pebbles designed as a mental weapon. Whatever it was, the effect was strong. Viking morale, already stretched thin by the constant pressure, clearly wavered. Many of them, superstitious and unnerved by the strange sound, began to falter, their souls crumbling. It was in this desperate moment that Eric's daughter, Eric the Red's daughter, stepped forward, showing the fierce, unyielding spirit of a true Norse woman. Despite being 9 months pregnant, herbally swollen with new life, she charged that wavering Norse line, bare-armed, her hair wild. She snatched up a fallen warrior's sword, smacked its flat blade against her own bare breasts, and let out a primal blood-curdling scream. This Kraelings, completely stunned by the seeming madness, this raw, ferocious display from a heavily pregnant woman, hesitated. It was a crucial, agonizing heartbeat of confusion. In that precious moment, the Norse line, shamed and energized by Freitas's incredibly courage, crashed forward. Iron axes, heavy and sharp, split cedar shields, obsidian-tipped spears, wickedly sharp, scraped against mail links, seeking gaps in the armor. Dead fell on both sides, a grim tally of the clash of worlds, but numbers mattered. The Vikings, despite their fierceness, were greatly outnumbered. They were forced to retreat once more, scrambling back inside the relative esophy of their wall, dragging wounded friends whose leather-bound wounds still bled slowly through the gaps in their clothing. Their Kraelings, having made their point, vanished into the gathering dusk, leaving behind a silence far more unnerving, more scary than any battle. And what of the physical? Archaeology at Lonzo Meadows, the site widely believed to be Vinland, tells its own harsh tale. Excavations have revealed a distinct blackened layer, clear proof that Samian burned buildings soon after their construction. Carbon dating of this layer matches perfectly with Thessaga timeline, placing the destruction directly within the period of Norse. Whether it was by native torches, victoriously reclaiming their land, or by Viking scorched earth tactics denying resources to their enemies, the message was deeply no one here, neither invader nor defender, would surrender quietly. This land was fought over, and the price of staying was proving far too high. Thorfinn Karlsifni, a practical merchant at heart, was a man who understood numbers, and the math, as Huited, was grim. His ambitious band of settlers, which had started with a hopeful 160 souls, had shrunk significantly. Disease, the constant draining, and the dangerous nature of childbirth, in a hostile birth, in a hostile birther of barely 100. Every lost life, every wounded warrior is a devastating blow to their already shaky foothold. Reinforcements were a logistical nightmare. It would require a dangerous 2,000-kilometer sail back to Greece, then another 1,000 kilometers or more to Iceland or Norway. And even if they could get them, how many would survive the journey, and for what? The pressure was relentless. Every tide, it seemed, brought more canoes, more watchful eyes, more arrows. The Norse could, and often did, win stand-up battle, their superior weaponry and fighting formations proving effective in direct confrontation, but they simply could not hold ground. They couldn't patrol every inch of the vast wild coastline, couldn't guard every tree, every fishing ground without constant, exhausting watchfulness. The Skrallings, with their deep knowledge of Theland and their mastery of hidden tactics, were slowly bleeding the Norsedry, wearing them down, chipping away at their numbers and their morale. Fefnal straw, the ultimate symbol of their hopelessness, came after a fortnight of nightly arrow attacks, a constant nerve-wracking reminder of their weakness. A scrawling champion, bold and defiant, paddled his canoe within shouting distance of thrall. With a powerful, scornful gesture, he threw an intact Viking's word onto the beach. It wasn't an act of surrender, it was an act of deep, chilling defiance. The taunt was clear, unmistakable. Your prized iron, your symbol of power, means nothing here. We can take it from you. We don't fear it. It was a mental blow. A declaration that the Norse technology caliphate was useless in the face of relentless indigenous resistance. Karlsefni, weary and burdened by Thuet, of his shrinking colony, talked with his captains. The saga of Rick the Red records his somber, final verdict, a statement that teaches with the painful truth of this. Although the land seems good to us, we will always live in fear of those who live in it. Let us go. There was no glory in this decision, only harsh realism. They loaded their ships with what livestock still lived, with barrels of the fabled grapes they had come for, and with what precious lumber they had managed to cut under Constatoro cover. When the last longship, its dragon prow facing homeward, finally slipped beyond the headland, disappearing into the vastness of the Atlantic, the Skrallings watched from their shore. Their shields were stacked, their bows unstrung, they had won. Europe's first bold attempt at an American colony, born of ambition and need, had lasted perhaps 3 short, brutal. It would never be tried again. The continent for another 4 centuries remained firmly in the hands of its original caretakers, so who truly won the first European native war in America. The scoreboard, when you look at it without the romantic filters of history, is plain, harsh, and completely clear. The Vikings brought with them the cutting edge of their age, iron tools, advanced seacraft, and Europe's deadliest blades. They were formidable warriors, legends in their own right. Yet the Spritlings, the indigenous peoples of Vinland, owned something far more powerful, far more enduring. They owned the woods, knowing every hidden path, every shadowed grove. They owned its tides, masters of their and perhaps most importantly, they owned the patience, the sheer unyielding will to bleed an invader dry, to deny them any lasting peace. Outnumbered, cut off from any hope of reinforcement, and mentally shaken by an enemy they couldn't fully understand or defeat on their own terms, the Norse folded. Their retreat, though perhaps framed as a strategic withdrawal, was undeniably it left the vast, rich continento, its original caretakers, for another 4 long, undisturbed centuries. When you walk the quiet peat bog paths of Lanso meadows today, the wind whispering through the grasses, you stand on truly sacred ground. You stand exactly where axes met arrows, where 2 vastly different worlds, each with its own history, its own laws, discovered with brutal clarity. Thought they simply could not share a beat, not without a fight to the bit. The sod walls of their temporary homes are long gone, reclaimed by but the bog still occasionally up iron rivets, remnants of those Viking ships and broken arrowheads, silent, touching witnesses to a forgotten war that for too long never even made it into a school textbook. Remember Thorvald bleeding out under his hastily-planted stone crosses. Remember Phratis, a pregnant warrior beating steel on Huron's skin, defying fear itself. And most importantly, remember the Skrallings, the true victors who simply refused to lose their home. And if you ever find yourself thinking that history is somehow inevitable, that the powerful Wallies win, then just think of those Vikings sailing home, their mail-clad legs perhaps a little less swaggering, because the locals, the true owners of land, refused to be conquered. They fought, they resisted, and they won.